Welcome back to the Done Deal Show. I'm live with Ben Jacobs. How are you, my friend?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very, very well. It's been exciting sort of 12 to 24 hours in the transfer window. I'm sure you're going to give us as much insight as possible into some of the new developments and a lot of the ongoing. They already feel like sagas. The amount of times I get asked a day, can you ask Ben about Lukaku? Can you ask him about Pulisic? Can you ask him about Dembele? So lots to delve into and talk about today. Of course, the big Darwin Nunez news. Bastoni, is he going to go to someone other than Tottenham now? Lukaku's exit. Pulisic to Liverpool won't go away. Or maybe that will after this stream, to be honest. Some Jesus updates. And we're going to look at Newcastle as well, that are kind of being a little bit ignored, really, by the mainstream media, maybe because they're not part of the traditional top six as of now. But we're going to take a look at what Newcastle are looking to get up to and do. Remember, viewers, any questions that you've got, feel free to put them in. Of course, we always dedicate time to our member chats and our super chats as well. But where to start today? I mean, Chelsea, it feels like things are kind of busy there in terms of speculation and potential kind of goings on, as it were. So, but maybe no better place to start than in West London at Stamford Bridge.
Yeah, Chelsea are obviously going to be busy. We've spoken before about how they'll need to bring in names. There's naturally a desire from the new ownership group to make a statement, and also important to note that the Abramovich regime and their planning had already put funds in place, but the anticipation that Chelsea would be in a position of needing defenders, midfielders, and a striker was perhaps not part of the bigger picture 6 months ago. And that's the challenge really for Chelsea. They've lost players they would have rather kept: Rudiger, Alonso, Christensen. They have to deal with a hole potentially in midfield, at least as far as Jorginho and Kante are concerned, because perhaps heading into this season, even if they stayed at the football club, they wouldn't be at their peak. Pulisic and Ziyech are both potentially linked with being outgoings. They obviously both won't be allowed to leave. And then there's the Lukaku situation. So all that means, even if Chelsea had the perfect nucleus and squad, they still need to try and strengthen to close the gap between Manchester City and Liverpool. And now, due to those outgoings, that need or desire, because of that goal to close the gap, has become more of an urgency. And then you sort of look at the speculation, and I guess let's start with Lukaku. We all know he wants out, and that unofficial contact between Lukaku and Inter has been going on for a long time. There was the interview mid-season, of course, which resulted in a lot of bad blood behind the scenes and distaste within the dressing room, even though Thomas Tuchel tried to kind of brush it under the carpet and Lukaku kind of said he was misquoted. Fundamentally, how can you be misquoted when you simply say, I've got unfinished business at Inter? And the simple situation now is that Lukaku wants to return to Inter, and Todd Bowley, who's leading the operational side from Chelsea's new American consortium, has spoken to Thomas Tuchel, and Tuchel is absolutely fine for Lukaku to leave. And the plans on the football side at Chelsea are naturally to replace Lukaku. And until Lukaku is replaced, a player, for example, like Armando Broja, may be kept at the club at pre-season. Tuchel, anyway, wants to assess him because he sees potential from his Southampton spell. The challenge with getting Lukaku to Inter is Chelsea are not just going to give Lukaku away out of sentiment or because they're being forced due to player power. They need a financial benefit from the deal. So it's still quite early stages with a fair amount of negotiations take place. And the clubs will now directly talk further this week in order to determine what solution can be found. And it's not only complicated by the fact that Lukaku came to Chelsea for the best part of 100 million and is on very high wages. The additional problem is that Inter don't have the money to complete any kind of permanent deal. So either the manner in which Lukaku is signed is going to have to be staggered financially speaking, or more likely there'll be a loan deal. But again, Chelsea are not just going to send him out on loan with any kind of view to bringing him back. They're going to want to financially benefit from that. So Lukaku is going to have to take a big pay cut either way. And Inter, if it is a straight loan deal, are going to have to pay a hefty fee, which in all likelihood will be ratioed in proportion to whatever his wage ends up being. So the figure being quoted of 20 million is potentially changeable and could become smaller if Lukaku moves to Inter on a wage that is less than his current Chelsea deal. And then added to all of that mix is whether Chelsea will try and leverage another player coming the other way. And these swap deals, as we've discussed on a previous show, sound good on paper, but are naturally more complicated because then you have to factor in the player going the other way. And there are 3 options that are being reported. There's not necessarily a ton of substance to all of them. I think Lautaro Martinez is the least likely to go. Firstly, because his agent has said that he's happy at Inter. And second of all, because Lukaku and Martinez are friends. So if Lukaku's not happy at Chelsea with the culture, with the dressing room, with the manager, he would be relaying that to Martinez, who may be swayed by Lukaku's opinion. But Inter don't want to sell Martinez unless they're absolutely forced to. So that's probably the least likely of the 3. Bastoni is a player that is probably the most likely to depart somewhere, but that doesn't mean that he'll be factored into any kind of swap deal. And then the most open from Inter's perspective as far as trading a player from the 3 that have been mentioned is Milan Skriniar. And I know there'll be Inter fans that say, well, hang on a minute, he sacked his agent and negotiated a new deal at Inter. He's leadership material. He basically bleeds blue and black. But he's also got an ambition to move to London and play in the Premier League and could be swayed. But these are ifs and buts, because the situation's fluid, the negotiations are complex, and even if Inter are prepared to add up a bunch of numbers to give Chelsea market value, that doesn't mean that Chelsea will want to trade on those specific players. But naturally, the advantage of Skriniar and Bastoni is that they provide Chelsea with the defensive cover that they need due to the departures. And even if Koundé comes in as one centre-back option, Chelsea are likely to need 2 at the back. So there's a range of intriguing possibilities with Lukaku, but the short answer to where the situation stands is that negotiations are only just starting, and it's very difficult for Inter to get the deal that they want, because Chelsea are going to stand firm and make sure that they get market value on this. So I think that the plot is going to thicken over the next kind of 7 to 10 days, but it wouldn't remotely surprise me if this deal drags on. And then the other factor, if we move on to Bastoni in particular, is that this isn't a Inter Bastoni Chelsea situation. This is a Chelsea haven't directly looked at Bastoni as a number 1 priority, but may be persuaded if Inter were prepared to offer him. Fantastic young player, ticks a lot of boxes. But Manchester United and Tottenham are ahead in terms of the courting of Bastoni, and yet nobody has made an offer to Inter. So Inter's position is probably that they don't want to sell Bastoni, and Chelsea's hope, if they chose to pursue that option, would be that Inter would change their mind if Lukaku was offered. But that's just outside speculation and analysis, whereas Inter are not going to want to lose Skriniar to Chelsea, Bastoni to Spurs, and then obviously even if they keep Martinez, there's still a huge hole there. So I think that the situation is again very fluid. Bastoni's come out and said, as you'd expect, he's going on vacation. He's got 2 years left at Inter. When he returns from vacation, he's going to come back to Inter. You expect a model professional footballer to say that, and a lot can change, especially because formally speaking, the window isn't open. And I think the other factor is that Bastoni, as I understand it, is the type of player that would have stayed at Inter until January, but because of a World Cup year, players potentially that would have waited and thought about a January move now in that World Cup year either want to say they're staying put or go earlier, i.e. this summer, because they want that stability. They don't now have that option to play 6 months at a club they're happy at and then decide to change their mind mid-season. I mean, obviously, technically they do because the window will be open, but it's more about the personal side of the player and their own stability. And often fans forget that these are human beings, young human beings in the case of a Bastoni, who want to be settled and want to stamp regular game time in a World Cup year. And if they move now and then have to potentially learn a new language, find a new house, all the personal stuff that fans forget about, that is very difficult. And naturally, because of the World Cup, and I'm not specifically talking about Bastoni now, but because of the World Cup, a player that knows they may need time to get that stability may choose to move now so they're settled before the World Cup, because they don't want to do World Cup and then have a transfer and it be in the middle of a season. So I think a Winter World Cup will be an intriguing new dynamic to the transfer window. But with Bastoni, the way that stands, it's less likely he'll be offered on a part exchange deal. And the reason why in a tweet that I wrote about this, I used the word if, is because everyone's looking at this through Inter sources and Inter's perspective, because they're trying to make the numbers work on Lukaku. But that doesn't mean that Chelsea are coming to the table with that option. They may have other defenders in mind. Koulibaly is one, Delete is another. So they're sport for choice as far as their shortlist is concerned. And the beauty from Chelsea's point of view is a lot of these targets are realistic. But from Inter's point of view, they are trying to work out, if they have to, they don't want to, but if they have to offload a player, which one of those three it would be to get the deal done. And then separately with Bastoni, if we take Chelsea out of the equation, it remains Tottenham, who are the front runners from the Premier League clubs, and Manchester United as well, firmly interested in him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you've said before, the swap deals, I always talk about these a lot. They are as rare as you like for all the factors that you've just mentioned. Lukaku leaving just feels, again, as long as financially he works for Chelsea, it's something they're going to push towards doing. The Bastoni deal, though, you brought up was an interesting one last night, because Spurs feel like they're sort of leading the way. A lot of the Italian press, and I saw a lot of it last night, so it was trying to decipher what came from where. But there was sort of talk of Bastoni wants to join Tottenham, and Antonio Conte, and then Man United kind of threw their hat in. There has just been maybe in the last half an hour, a report that's come out again from Italy, basically stating that there's still no official offers have gone in yet from either Tottenham or Manchester United for him. And I suppose there's this element as well from Inter's point of view that if suddenly there was a 50-60 million pound offer for Bastoni, which they accepted, it changes their financial situation from being able to go and get themselves Lukaku in that way. But it certainly looks like Lukaku's time at Chelsea, his short return, is going to be coming to an end, which most Chelsea fans seem pretty happy about. In terms of the attack, and we'll get on to Bastoni a little bit later in terms of insight on that, but in terms of the attack at Chelsea, Ousmane Dembele's name doesn't want to go away. There's a further report today from a media outlet stating that Dembele has chosen Chelsea. There's reports 2 or 3 days ago that it's very close or on the edge of happening. What's your understanding with the Dembele situation? We know that Tuchel is interested. We know that Chelsea have always had a long-standing want for him. Is anything kind of advanced in the past 6 or 7 days at all?
It's difficult for Chelsea. There were initial reports out there that the deal was close. Some even said done, but that was not my understanding. The confidence that has been growing in the Chelsea camp is down to the fact that PSG's interest has cooled. So Dembele effectively wanted to go to PSG, thought that deal would happen. There's been a lot of change behind the scenes at PSG, Campos coming in, Leonardo going out, Pochettino's future uncertain. And coupled with the fact they've spent a lot of money, time and energy in keeping Mbappe, there's now no guarantees that PSG are going to continue their pursuit. And they've certainly not been as aggressive in the last 2 or 3 weeks with proceeding, having started initial discussions with Dembele's people. So then he's left with 2 options. One is a stay at Barcelona, and Barcelona are getting very frustrated because they're not going to improve their offer now. And that's been on the table for a while, and Dembele's not signed it. And clearly he's keeping his cards close to his chest and isn't committing to that football club, but that's worsening his relationship with the likes of Xavi and generally the Barcelona dressing room. He could still sign that and he could allow this transfer saga to drag on. But Chelsea see a window of opportunity due to PSG cooling off. And Thomas Tuchel has made it clear to Todd Boehly that Dembele is a player that he knows and admires and thinks he can get the best out of. But there's been nothing further than that at this point. Chelsea this week and in the coming probably 3 weeks, because I think this will drag on right until the end of the month, are looking to see what kind of terms they can agree with Dembele, and also seeking some kind of reassurance that he would be the right fit. And that's the other factor again, that it's all very well signing Dembele and calling him a marquee signing, but you got to get the best out of him and ensure that he doesn't disrupt the chemistry and dynamic at Chelsea Football Club. And when you know a player has played hard ball at a club like Barcelona, who obviously are either desperate to get him to sign or have an outgoing, then it becomes highly important that Chelsea get the right character. And I've said it before, and I'll repeat it again, that Todd Boehly is all about people fits. And Dembele is definitely a player that Chelsea want, but they need to progress those talks to a more advanced level. And I think that, to the point I made earlier about it being a World Cup year, that's why a club like Chelsea are moving fast now to ensure they get their business done due to that disruption. And I know that people will kind of hear me make that point a lot and say, well, hang on a minute, why does that matter? Particularly with a player like Bastoni, because Italy aren't there. But it's exactly the same situation for a player like Bastoni, even if he's not going to Qatar. And the reason for that is because you're changing from a summer World Cup where you would be watched by scouts, and then a lot of people would come in for the wonder at a World Cup. James Rodriguez historically is a great example of that. And then you move into the new season. When a World Cup moves to winter, it provides instability. So if you are Bastoni, even not participating in a World Cup, and you were thinking about moving in January, you may bank on that move and wait, and then find that because the World Cup is mid-season, the red-hot player that is at the World Cup suddenly comes into a club's thinking and is opportunistically bought, and then your move collapses. So when I talk about stability, it's two ways. It's the players at the World Cup, because they might not want to go to Qatar and then have to move, but it's also an Italian player or anyone not at a World Cup that may get wind now that they're a January target and then get supplanted due to the window of transfer opportunities that a World Cup always provides. So then they want to get that deal done now again for stability reasons, so they don't bank on something and then a club's plans change because someone unknown or somebody who is in incredible form ends up being the gambler club decides to take post-World Cup. And that's what makes the World Cup, and I guess the Euros as well, so interesting, that you always find that 6 or 7 players that you didn't think of, that a club weren't alerted to or become available, end up moving. And this summer window is definitely going to be impacted for players going to a World Cup and not going to the World Cup as well by the fact that the World Cup has moved.
Yeah, listen, 110%. And I think for me, what really stands out is, it happens a lot. Players can go in and out of fashion like managers. You think of Eddie Howe at Newcastle, which we'll move on to later. 3 years ago, everybody and his dog was talking about him taking over at England. Could he manage one of the top 6 sides? And before Newcastle signed him, everybody was talking like he suddenly become this bad man. He just fell out of fashion. And yeah, so it's going to be an interesting one. I mean, on the Bastoni thing, just very quickly, I know Man United have kind of just thrown their hat into this mix. Is it still, I assume, as you said, it's still more likely to be Tottenham at this point? There's been no further developments from there. There's been no official bids.
Bastoni says no, and that he is happy at Inter. He's got 2 years remaining. And it's sort of interesting the way he phrased it. He said, I'm not aware of any bids from the club, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been talks with his people or his agent. And the way a transfer will often work is that you'll sound out the players' people and you'll work out what the terms are and you'll try and agree a deal in principle, and then you'll go to the club, and often that will involve either activating an official release clause or just putting an offer in. So the offer doesn't always come first, or is not presented officially. And as a consequence, I think it was key that Bastoni reassured Inter fans and to some extent his own club that if he's going to talk publicly about his future, he wants to play this by the book. And he's certainly happy and settled in Inter, yet tempted by 2 big Premier League clubs. And I think that Tottenham have definitely made an approach to him and remain the front runners. And Manchester United are fully aware that they need to strengthen in that area, but at this point are less advanced in the deal. But you would expect that, because Ten Hag, comparative to Ralph Rangnick during an uncertain period will have his own names and targets in mind, and will be hoping to wrestle a lot of control over that recruitment policy.
Yeah.
This window may be too soon for him to do that overnight, but Bastoni is clearly a player that specifically for Ten Hag appeals to him. Tottenham, I think, would be more confident of making that deal. But again, coming back to what I said before, Inter in such a strange position. They blew winning Serie A, if you can call it that, although huge credit to Milan because they were so consistent in the back half of the season. But I think Inter, halfway through the season, felt like they were going to be able to win Serie A once again. And they sort of stumbled. And they haven't completed a takeover that was long rumoured. And they've got financial woes, and the ownership group they've got are not especially popular. They needed stopgap financing last summer. And then suddenly you've got this huge interest in a number of their stars that are really the nucleus of that team, and young stars as well, that their value is probably going to increase if Inter can hang on to them. Yeah. And yet they may be forced to sell, but they're not going to get rid of everyone. I mean, you're certainly not going to get a scenario where Skriniar and Bastoni and Martinez all leave, because that's a huge core of their team, and there's interest in other players as well. So if Skriniar leaves, they'll want to keep Bastoni. If Bastoni leaves, they'll want to keep Skriniar. Otherwise, they're going to be in huge trouble next season, or they're going to have to find ready-made replacements very quickly. So Bastoni doesn't strike me, talking to people close to him, as the kind of player that will push for a move. He's only 23 years of age. He's very much still developing. And you find this often with Italian players. They do just culturally, and again, it's that personal aspect, enjoy staying in Italy, at least in the early part of their career, where their friends are and their families are. Other players from different parts of the world, for whatever reason, are sometimes just lured by the Premier League. But you find this a lot with young Italians. Donnarumma is another good example. Vlahovic too, just wants to stay in Serie A. And it's that mentality, it's that climate, it's that culture, it's that food, it's their family, it's their friends. And this is a huge generalization, but Bastoni falls into that category of somebody that will be tempted by a big move and is ambitious, but it has to be right for him on a personal level. And that's what might keep him at Inter. But make no mistake, Conte is very intent to make this signing, and that's why Spurs are ahead of Manchester United in the race at the moment.
A comprehensive roundup as ever there from Ben. And yeah, look, it's what you said there. What stands out to me is, again, as a fan that loves the transfer window, I look at it as almost like a separate entity. It's the Vatican within Rome for me of football. I love it. There is the Skriniar and there is the Bastoni side of things. If Chelsea do want Skriniar as part of this Lukaku deal, it's a case of, well, you better get it done quick, because if Spurs and or Man United land Bastoni tomorrow morning, that changes the complexities of things. Lautaro Martinez, unlikely to happen. It changes everything. And that's what I kind of enjoy about the transfer window, but all these different directions things can go in. We are going to move on and talk a bit of Newcastle in a moment. We are going to speak the Darwin Nunez situation. We are going to get you a Gabriel Jesus update as well. So please stay with the Football Terrace. Make sure the like button has been smashed. Let's get this past 500 likes while we're live on the air. Another move, though, sort of connected to, I've seen a few tweets with your name kind of quoted on them, but I always like to ask the question as well. Christian Pulisic to Liverpool has kind of been a rumor that's done the rounds in the past 4 or 5 days. To your understanding, is this a deal that really holds any water at all?
It isn't. And I think that if Pulisic is to depart Chelsea, it will be to a Serie A club, not to another team in the Premier League. From Pulisic and his people's perspective, Liverpool seems like a great fit. And make no mistake, Jurgen Klopp is an admirer and sees the potential. But this direct notion that Pulisic is the target to replace Mane as or when he confirms his departure from Liverpool, with Bayern Munich being the most likely destination, is incorrect. And having put that possible link between Pulisic and Liverpool directly to a Liverpool source at very senior level with huge knowledge of their recruitment, the response I got in one word was nonsense. So I don't think that Liverpool are seriously considering Pulisic in the context of Mane or outside of the context of Mane. However, it is obvious that Klopp would be a great manager for Pulisic. And sometimes what you find is that the manager has one opinion and the recruitment model has another. And that's what's really interesting about how Liverpool work, that they often have mathematicians who know nothing about football presenting only numbers. They have scouts with a gut instinct about players looking at their first touch and how they recover the ball. And then they have the committee who accumulate all of the information. And when Klopp inputs, it's clear that he respects Pulisic. But when the club look at the different attributes and whether he is the right name to replace Mane, he, at best, is one of many, many names that would be on a very long list that Liverpool would then condense down. And the current state of play is that Pulisic is not the ready-made choice or replacement that Liverpool would go for if Mane leaves. And I don't see that changing. First of all, because I think Chelsea want to assess Pulisic. And you look at his assist the other day for the US men's national team, and it's clear at his age, the talent that he has and how his value can still rise. And then were he to leave, I think there's other clubs circling more seriously than Liverpool, particularly in Serie A. And again, much like I said with Bastoni, Pulisic is a very humble character that is all about what's right for him in a World Cup year, where his role and responsibility for the US men's national team is completely different to at Chelsea. At Chelsea, he's expected to be creative, versatile, chip in with goals. At the US men's national team level, he has to add to that being a leader and a dressing room influence and far more vocal on the football field. And if you've heard Pulisic do media, he's quite shy in front of the camera, and the same can be said in the dressing room. That's not to say that he doesn't talk and offer leadership, but it's an area of his game that he's looking to develop. And at this point, the World Cup is his focus. So he either needs to move quickly or remain at Chelsea for the point I made before, that having his future hanging over him in the middle of a season won't work. So if Mane leaves Liverpool or another club comes in definitively and early to make an offer, then Chelsea have got a decision to be made. But as things stand, that's all just pure speculation, and nobody has yet come in for Pulisic, and there's no reason to assume that he will be leaving Chelsea imminently, especially under a new American-led ownership group that sees his potential. And I know I keep coming back to this about players being nervous about making moves that are either impulsive or even at times, if they financially benefit them, risky. And I think that fans, again, keep just looking at individuals and thinking they're right for our football club. We've got the money, we've got the transfer fee, let's do it. The Premier League's a huge appeal. Serie A is great. But actually, at this stage of a transfer window, when you're talking to the players' people and when you're talking to agents in particular who are giving you a fluid situation with lots of interests, the first thing the player often asks is, where am I going to live? And who else is there that I know? And if it's a foreign move, what language am I going to speak? So like when I mentioned Donnarumma earlier, it took him 2.5 more years to leave Milan because of that affiliation to Italy to get to PSG. And the reason, again, for that, even for a young player, is because he didn't feel it was right when he was 20 and 21, even though every year everyone was linked with him. Fans were saying, you know, he's going to be the next big goalkeeper. Everyone was chasing after him. And Pulisic is exactly the same. It's really important to stress over and over again that there's a certain breed of footballer that just wants to be settled. It's like you or me in a job. Someone could come calling, but you have to factor in where you currently are. Now, the challenge with Pulisic at Chelsea is, does he fit into Tuchel's style? And does he really get on with the manager? I don't mean on a personal level, I mean in a football level, because again, he wants someone to kind of give him that one-on-one attention and develop his game, especially as far as that football intelligence is concerned, because he's got a real brain on him. He's a very instinctive player. But when you ask a player like Pulisic to kind of do everything, be versatile, go wide, cut inside, score goals, provide assists, then you need at times to give him that bit of structure in games. And it's sometimes that game management and that coaching aspect of, when should you show that leadership on the football field? When should you be selfish? When should you take the game by the scruff of the neck? And if you watch Klopp in training, he is very, very good at creating manufactured scenarios for each of these players that don't just tell you about what if we're 1-0 down, what if we're 3-0 up, what if we've got a set piece. What Klopp does differently to other managers, as I understand it, is he also takes an individual or a few players and says, okay, I want you to try this attack, but now I want you to only be selfish, or I want you to only look up, or I want you to switch sides and do exactly the same thing, or I just want you to take a punt, or I want you to see whether you can keep the ball in the corner or draw more than one defender. And every coach does this a little bit, but Klopp simulates that in 5-a-side and in 11-a-side. So then when players get into these match scenarios, they're not as nervous about maybe being selfish or going for goal from distance, because they've tried it with proof in training more often than they've had the opportunity to do at other clubs. Other managers like to have a bit more of a rigid nature to their training, and Tuchel's a good example of that he does it in a set way. It's a very good way, and of course he's adaptable and fluid, and you've got your attacking coaches, defensive coaches, so nobody's saying that they're completely different behind closed doors, but Klopp is very good at understanding the player element and the psychological element to get the best out of his players. And that's naturally why Pulisic could be a good fit. But like I say, unfortunately for those either at Liverpool wanting him or at Chelsea wishing him gone, there's nothing yet that suggests that move has any realistic chance of happening.
Is that your delivery at your door? I'm conscious that you're going to miss it. I'll keep talking to the audience. Go do the things, and we'll see you back in a few seconds.
I think it will have just been left outside at this point.
Okay, fair enough. I was like waiting for you to stop. I didn't want to interject. I was really very much enjoying listening to that. People saying your pizza's going to go cold.
It's not a cold pizza. It's an Amazon delivery. Sadly, I tell you something. If it was a pizza, I'd have been off camera and would have been taking a bite halfway through with absolutely no hesitation.
Not a problem whatsoever. Comment here says, how are Chelsea targeting players? Scouts, the Bowley Group, or Thomas Tuchel?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the recruitment model will be changed under the Bowley Group. So what they do now isn't reflective of the future. And I think that the recruitment model at Chelsea will be, as I've said many times, more akin to Liverpool. Right now, it's just a transitional period. So it's about how the old regime attracted players, and some of those targets will predate Clearlake Bowley. And the reason for that, comparative to maybe another owner, is because the finances haven't changed significantly. So if Clearlake Bowley came in and suddenly said to Thomas Tuchel and Emma Hayes, I've got X amount more, then the targets or who they went for could change overnight. But right now, Bowley in particular has been very respectful of Tuchel and Hayes, and he's met them on a number of occasions, including this week, and he's worked out what they want. And then he's effectively tasked the old regime to try and get those targets within the budget allocated. So it's business as usual at Chelsea as far as the process is concerned. Now, you may get a scenario where, because of the outgoings at Chelsea, they have to spend a bit more. And that's where the new ownership group will be ambitious and opportunistic and prepared to add a marquee name or two. So that allows a bit more flexibility, perhaps, for Tuchel to say, well, listen, we wanted a centre-back, a midfielder, maybe two centre-backs, or certainly two defenders, and a replacement for Kante/Jorginho. But now, because of Lukaku, we want to bring in one or two attacking players. And then who knows, that gives them the opportunity to offload a Pulisic or Ziyech. And this is where the transfer window is very fluid. But it's extremely early in Clearlake Bowley's tenure, and also in the context of the transfer window. Even though clubs plan ahead, and they do so one or two windows ahead often, it hasn't even opened yet. It's opened in a de facto sense because clubs are negotiating and confirming deals, and Spurs are a good example of that with Perisic, but it hasn't opened in a practical or a legal sense. There's a long, long way to go. But I think that you'll find at Chelsea, there's movement both ways on the men and the women's side. I mean, only today, Chelsea women signed a French international. So clearly, Chelsea, with their men and women's teams, want to move as early as possible. And I think, again, that's a Bowley thing, that he's very aware And I think you get this by working for American franchises, particularly in baseball. He's very aware. He's not going to be fooled or surprised at a Premier League club like Chelsea by the twists and by how long a deal takes. And he's also very big on that people element. And again, one of the reasons why I keep coming back to that is because I know from Liverpool and also from Manchester City how hard they work to court a player and how well they invest in that time and energy of getting buy-in from the agent, the player, the family, of showing them what the club's like, of selling them on the system, of introducing them to other players if they've got someone perhaps they don't know that speaks the same language. And Chelsea have never really done that. Chelsea have barged in a bullish way. They've been quite definitive. They've been quite cutthroat in the market. So you can't fault them on that. But they've not been afraid to move first and think second. And now the Bowley group going forwards will put a lot more thought beforehand and then they'll table an offer. That doesn't mean delays or a slow process. It just means investing more manpower, woman power into the analytical side, into the scouting side, into the courting side, into the modernization of the football club. That's obviously a longer term plan. To make sure that what's on offer is more appealing. And then when they offer, they know they've got a higher chance. Arsenal's problem, Chelsea's problem to a lesser extent, but certainly compared to Liverpool to an extent, is that when they make an offer, they don't always get their number one target. You look at Liverpool, they very rarely miss out on a player that they absolutely want, unless they fall into like an Mbappe or a Messi style category where it's natural that you won't always get that. But virtually everyone else that flies under the radar or is a huge talent. I mean, I suppose Tchouaméni is the one player that Liverpool may say they missed out on if they ever give us any intel on that. And that's just because the player only wanted to join Real Madrid. But Chelsea and Arsenal will look to do more prep around lining up a transfer. So then when they table their offer, they firmly believe that they'll beat off their suitors. And Chelsea are much better than Arsenal at this, but they're still not a Liverpool or a Manchester City. So there's room for improvement. And I think that you'll see that under Clay Lake Bowley.
It's interesting you say that because I got into one of the guys, another sort of fan content creator, Lee Gunner, that I host a show with. I spoke about that for me, Chelsea under this new regime, they need to it's subtle adjustments to what was already a very well-run club, and they could go to that next level. And that very much sounds like it. You mentioned Arsenal there. Gabriel Jesus, we spoke about sort of via direct message in terms of the build-up to this. In the last few days, there's been talks of Chelsea hijacking the deal, gate crashing it. Real Madrid still looking at him. And then there seems to be this kind of difference in reports I'm reading that, Arsenal are willing to pay 30, 35 million. But City are holding out for a little bit more, sort of high 40s, 50s. Echoes very much what you said on the show on your first appearance, sort of 2 to 3 weeks back, that City have set a certain amount and Arsenal are currently reluctant to pay it. Is that still the case? And could this lead to an opportunity for another club sort of coming in and taking the player away from Arsenal?
Jesus is an interesting one, and I think that Manchester City have, by all accounts, softened a little bit on the lowest valuation that they're prepared to sell for. So when we first spoke about this, I think the fee was 55 million in Manchester City's head, something in that ballpark. And Arsenal definitely thought that that was around 10 million too high. And this is the issue, or some would call it the business of Arsenal's recruitment strategy, that they desperately need a striker. Jesus ticks all the boxes. He's still only 25. He obviously would gel straight into a Premier League team. Still scored 8 Premier League goals, albeit in 30-odd appearances last season, and has been in double figures, I think, in the Premier League in all competitions since 2017, 2018. And there's huge potential there, because if you go back a couple of seasons when he scored 13, 14 odd goals, I think his best tally in the Premier League was in 1920, but he had a really good 2017, 2018. You know that you've got a finished product and someone that only needs to add 5 or 6 goals at his best to be 20 plus. And if you take Arsenal and add 20 plus goals, then for me, they're a top 4 team all day. And why not pay that extra 10 million and blow everyone else out of the market? But for whatever reason, Arsenal felt that 55 million was too high. The situation now is that Manchester City will accept an offer, and they're quite prepared to let Jesus leave because they know that the player wants a bit more regular game time. And the value of the deal has dropped by around about 10 to 12 million. So it's well within Arsenal's ballpark. And I think now City will let Jesus go for somewhere in the low 40 millions. And if they do that, then it should be within Arsenal's financial plan, and they'll see that as value. But of course, the challenge and the irony of it all is that when you drop the price, you increase the interest. So then you suddenly get a range of other suitors circling. And I must say, of all the transfers that we've spoken about, 25-year-old Gabriel Jesus, who's virtually guaranteed to get into double figures if you play him for 38 Premier League games, is a bargain signing. Others may disagree, but if you're Arsenal and you're paying under 45 million on a striker with Premier League experience, and you're guaranteed, I mean, not guaranteed, but statistically likely to get 10 plus goals, but much more likely 15 plus goals, I would take that if I was Arsenal any day of the week. And Arsenal are very much interested. There's not as much substance to the Chelsea links. Newcastle have circled in the past. West Ham have looked at him, but are much more likely to try and get Armando Broja from Chelsea and for a lower fee. So Arsenal can still consider themselves very much in the mix for this deal. But as yet, they've not tabled an offer. They've made inquiries. They've spoken about terms. They believe that they can get a deal over the line. So I think the next step, if this is to progress, is Arsenal to be a bit more decisive in the market. And that's always been the stumbling block. And it wouldn't at all surprise me if the longer this goes on, the more other suitors start to see the value in Jesus. And then Arsenal again could end up having a serious rival. And that's why, coming back to my previous point, I don't understand in my head why you wouldn't pay over the odds for Jesus and get the deal done early in the window if you're Arsenal, because they so desperately need that defined focal point up front that's going to get them at least 15 plus goals. Other fans will say, well, he's not a Vlahovic, who was the original player that they want. He's not a Jonathan David, and he's not a Lukaku, another player that very loosely Arsenal have been linked with. I doubt that Lukaku, being unhappy in London at Chelsea and wanting Inter so badly, if that fell through for any reason, I don't think that he's suddenly going to just go to the Emirates Stadium. Not sure that that's a deal that Lukaku would want. But, Arsenal fans in the chat may say, if you present all those names, Jesus is not our top choice. But I just think when you've got a player that's used to winning, used to scoring, and used to the Premier League,
great age,
take him.
Yeah, Ben, I agree with you, and it's almost. I'm not a gambler really. Like, I'll go to a casino and I'll limit myself to 20, 30 quid. I'll happily lose if I'm in there. But if I put a couple of chips down on roulette and they come in and I'm 20, 30 pound up, I quit while I'm ahead. I'm straight away. Arsenal have looked like they've been able to reduce this asking price, through not bidding yet, holding out. They might have shaved 5, 10 million pound off this deal, maybe even more. Did you say 10 to 12 million? Like, take it. Trying to push it even further by an extra 2, extra 3, extra 4, and then a Chelsea or then a Real Madrid comes in and sweeps in. It just feels like, a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush here, and get it done, get it over the line and move forward. But Gooners, what do you make of this, people? Should Arsenal, if they've been able to help reduce this price down, should they act now, strike while the iron is hot and get it done and get it over the line? Please let us know. Now, another striker that's been trending all day today has been, of course, Darwin Nunez. Man United linked with him. United, reported by yourself last week, pretty close to agree in all areas, really. The player interested in the Man United project being a fairly big priority in Man United summer. But of course, as you said, as we had Dean Jones say on the channel, United had to be careful of a big club in a better position than them, i.e. Liverpool coming in and getting involved. Now, of course, both sets of sort of Manchester-based and Liverpool-based press are now saying neither want to get into a bidding war. Neither really see him as a priority. I have to say, I don't necessarily believe that. I think that's local press saving face. What's the latest as far as you're aware of the Darwin Nunez situation? And are Man United at risk here at losing out on a big target of theirs?
I mean, make no mistake, from Ten Hag's point of view, Nunez is a huge priority. And why wouldn't he be? He's one of the hottest properties in world football at the moment. And you get that when you scored 26 league goals in 28 games during the previous season at Benfica. The challenge so early in the window is the level of interest, and Newcastle are also in the mix too. I don't think that Nunez would pick Newcastle, but that complicates things too due to the financial muscle power that they have. And even if they don't succeed, that inflates the market as far as this possible transfer is concerned. So, as you correctly say, the two Premier League clubs that are the closest to getting to a deal with Nunez are Manchester United and Liverpool. I wouldn't quite classify the dynamic as both clubs don't want a bidding war. I would more accurately state the situation is that Liverpool will simply not engage in a bidding war. The way that they approach their recruitment is that they come up with their offer, they agree terms, they make a fair offer, and then they're not going to get engaged in a tit for tat or a back and forth. They would just walk away. Manchester United's fear is less about whether Liverpool are going to outbid them on a financial point of view and more about whether Liverpool, as you would expect, are simply going to trump them because they're Liverpool and they're challenging for the Premier League and they've got Klopp and they've got Champions League football, and Manchester United have got a new manager and don't have Champions League football. So in a decision of marginal gains, Liverpool, if they bid, in a stronger position. Benfica want a bidding war, and perhaps when Nunez was first on the radar before the window opened and really dating back to January, Benfica, as I understand it, were considering a fee of 70 to 75 million. Now that fee has gone up by a good 15 million to, at an absolute minimum, 80 million, but more like 85 and even potentially 90 million, which tells you the hot sort of property that Nunez is. It's Declan Rice territory almost. And rightly so if you look at last season. But I think that Manchester United and Liverpool and even Newcastle are a little bit reticent by that huge price tag, especially when you consider that although there's been a breakthrough season in the Primera Liga in 2021-22, he wasn't as prolific as a goal scorer, playing almost the same amount of games in the season before. But what you get with Nunez is a hugely athletic player, tremendous acceleration, especially over short kind of distances, can cut in, can hang on the shoulder of defenders, has got that sort of really explosive nature to his game, good awareness, excellent kind of movement off the ball, and a strong finisher. So it's exactly what Manchester United need. And it's also a strong option for Liverpool, especially with the departure of Mane. So the interest from both those clubs is legitimate. Manchester United are slightly more advanced and are close to an agreement with Nunez's people, but neither club yet has progressed things to the point where they've agreed a fee with Benfica. So I think that the hope is that Benfica are prepared to sell, and the challenge is in determining the market value for a player. And I think if Liverpool don't get market value, they walk away. And if Liverpool do get market value, there's a danger from Manchester United's point of view that they get him ahead of Manchester United, because I think a player like Nunez would be more swayed by Liverpool than Manchester United due to the instability at United and the fact that he'd be coming across and playing Champions League football. So not a lot has really moved, other than the fact that every day or two, it seems like the value of Nunez rises. And I think it's clear now that even though Benfica would love a bidding war and Newcastle's vague interest, well, not really vague interest, but Newcastle's interest helps that. But I think that the key at the moment is for Manchester United to focus as quickly as they can on tying down Nunez to come to them over Liverpool. And then when they go to Benfica, if they need to pay a little bit more, I still think they will. But the danger is that if Nunez is lured by Liverpool, then Manchester United's chances of success get less and less by the day.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, again, you've got insight and knowledge, but I love the way, as I said, a few weeks running now, I love how you add your opinion and your insight and the element of what's likely in there. And I think you're absolutely right that Man United, this is what I keep saying to United fans, we may still be forced at this moment in time into paying a bit more than we really want to for players' salaries, fees, because of a decade of failure. Liverpool, they've got something we haven't right now, and that's you can come into a team that can compete for the Premier League and the Champions League instantly. You're going to have to wait for that at Manchester United, and players are acutely aware. So it's going to be an interesting one, and it's all about whether Man United are prepared to pay more. Because I think with Benfica, it's going to be right. If United offer 80 million, Liverpool only offer 60. I'm just throwing those figures out there. They'll accept Man United and they'll reject Liverpool's. Man United, we know the good thing is for United though is Nunez is willing to come and play, if that makes sense. And it's going to be an intriguing one to see how that kind of transpires and moves forward over the coming weeks. It really is. And he's such a polarizing player as well, because there's a lot of fans from both clubs that just don't want him. They don't think he's that good. Equally, there's some that think he's brilliant. So it's certainly an interesting one to watch. Viewers, make sure you're hitting the like button for us. A few people asking for updates on Koundé and De Jong and a few others. I've kind of not, even behind the scenes, I didn't speak to Ben about them because I just don't think there's been any change in those situations for over a week. So there's almost 0 point in talking about deals that have just not changed at this moment in time. So I know a lot of you are asking. I've had about 20 DMs. Terry, can you ask this? Can you ask that? Not been able. There's just no point right now. Would have brought that. Same as Ericsson and things like that. There's been no real change. So the news that was 2 or 3 that came out 2, 3, 4 days ago, I think pretty much still remains the same. You mentioned Newcastle, Ben, who are kind of. I'm not saying they've been quiet. I mean, in terms of the media is really focusing on Man United and Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, as they tend to. In terms of business going on there, what's the sort of the SP and the stuff that's currently happening right now in Newcastle?
I like the way that Newcastle are approaching their transfer business dating back to January. Very sensible, but what they needed in January is not the same as what they need now due to the club's ambition. They had to stay up. And you bring in a Chris Wood, for example, and that helps because it adds depth and directness. And Trippier was an excellent signing too. Bruno has really excelled and, to be honest, quicker than I thought. We knew the talent that he had, but he's really become integral to that football club. And it's sort of interesting because I thought that Newcastle might add another in that position in January this summer due to the fact that Bruno maybe needed a bit more time to settle, but he's been so good, so consistent, so clinical, and Joe Linton has got a second wind and realised his potential, so they don't necessarily need to add into that kind of central midfield area. And naturally, when you think about Newcastle now, they're going to be linked with everyone under the sun due to the money that they've got. But I still think you'll see quite a sensible window. Dan Ashworth is brand new there. And the first task actually for Newcastle will be to complete the signing of Matt Targett on a permanent deal. I think for somewhere in the region of 12 million from Aston Villa. And if they succeed in that, it will be a really good piece of business because I was impressed by him. He went a bit under the radar almost because Trippier came in, scored a few goals before he got injured and was the marquee signing. Still a coup, I think, for Newcastle to have got him from Atletico Madrid in January. And then everyone was talking about Bruno naturally, and Targett was just consistent, as was Dan Burn actually. And that's what I mean about how smart and sensible their recruitment was in January. They didn't get lured in by a fancy signing, a big name signing, just for the heck of it. In the summer, we might see something a little bit more different. So when you look at marquee names, Nunez, they have been inquiring about, don't think they'll get him. Dembele, they've looked at, not interested in a move to Tyneside. and wants his next move to have instant Champions League football. So even if he could be persuaded to go up to Newcastle United, it's not going to be this season. Gareth Bale has been very vaguely linked to Newcastle, but there's been 100 other clubs. And I remember engaging with Newcastle fans on this 6 months ago in January, and a lot of them didn't want him. And really, the link between Bale and Newcastle comes directly from Yasser Al-Rumayyan, the Newcastle United chairman, who enjoyed watching Bale at Real Madrid and would like a marquee name. But there's nothing much to that, and Newcastle haven't made any active approaches. So then you sort of get the sense, when you put it in those terms, that Newcastle are not just going to buy for the sake of it, and they're not just going to throw money around in the market for a marquee name that doesn't fit into Eddie Howe's style. So that then leaves you looking at Howe's style and saying, where do they need to strengthen? And the obvious answer is up front, because Callum Wilson has had injury problems and is ultimately getting on a bit. And Chris Wood is not the solution for a team who are challenging for the Champions League, or at least hoping to. And Alan St-Maximin is a great player, as is someone like Miguel Almiron, who may well leave the club, certainly not being integral in the back end of last season. But those are two players that are great to cut in field, and ASM in particular, far more integral than Almiron. Huge talent, huge personality, but they're not going to be your 15 or 20 plus goals that you need. And that's where Ekitike could be the solution, and is probably the one to watch from Newcastle's point of view. They still got a lot of work to do to close that deal. It's not a given. I think they're closer in terms of agreeing a deal with the club rather than player. And he was one that was also linked in the January window, and it didn't get over the line. So there's a strong possibility of that. And I think Newcastle fans will be hugely excited if they get that one over the line. But if they don't, they're going to have to find a striker from somewhere. Dominic Calvert-Lewin is another player on their radar. Nothing advanced there, but you could see Newcastle move in that direction if they don't get another striker in first. So look out for Newcastle strengthening in the striker position. And then they need a goalkeeper. They also need a centre-back. And Sven Botman is the player that they thought they were going to get in January, but they were unable to complete a deal for. And he is still very much on their radar. So work to be done on the negotiation side. I think people wrongly assume that Newcastle just go with big offers, big wages, and are going to get players that, for want of a better word, are money hungry or greedy. But actually, they're selling this football club based upon the fan culture, based upon the unique atmosphere, based upon the stadium, which is fantastic to play in. I know a lot of Premier League stadiums are, but if you've been in St James's Park, it's still very unique. You look at all the flags around, you look at how vocal the fan base are and so on. But there's challenges, because there's players that are kind of wondering what the football club represents these days. They're questioning the ownership and the links with the Saudi state. And I'm not going to get into that now, because I have this debate with Newcastle fans very respectfully, I might say. They're a great bunch to talk to. They're very intelligent. They're very informed on the issues. But that's a debate for another day. But the point is, not every player is sold by the football club. Some at one extreme are just wowed by it. And Bruno's a good example of that. Others don't want to move up to Tyneside. Some are sold because of the financial offer and the club's ambition, and others are worried about who owns the football club. And it sort of strikes me now, when they have a deal on the table, that with a lot of players, there'll be two opposite extremes. Some it's just a hard no, some it's a automatic yes, and there will be middle ground, clearly. But I think a lot of players will have a very fixed view on Newcastle United. Some will dismiss it instantly, others will want to sign at the click of a fingers. And like I say, Bruno fell into that category. So it's one to watch, but I think Newcastle will bring in a minimum of 3 names and no more than 5. And I think that of those 3, you'll definitely see a goalkeeper, you'll definitely see a centre-back, and you'll definitely see a striker.
Great insight and update there, Ben. Really appreciate that. We do. And I know, viewers, you've got lots of other players that you're asking about, and we'll do some research into them. And I know there's links today with, I think it's Ibrahim Sangare, the PSV. I think it's a PSV midfielder. There's lots of rumours, and typically we'll do some research into that as a collective on the channel when we get our next spate of journalists on to talk about about them. Ben, I know you've got a hard stop yourself at 3. I know you've got a lot of other things to do today as well. So thank you very, very much for coming on and giving us your insight and everything else. It's great knowledge around what's going on at Chelsea at the moment. Brilliant breakdown of the Darwin Nunez situation and the Arsenal update as well. Very, very good. Thank you very much for your time. Viewers, thank you for everyone that's contributed today. Make sure you hit the like button before you leave today. If you've only just tuned in, the video will re-upload itself in a matter of moments. It's already timestamped. You can go to all the different sections and updates on all the different clubs that Ben has spoken about today. So thank you. But until next time, everybody, take care. Goodbye. God bless. And we'll see you all again very, very soon. Thank you.